Most people said my mother was kind. Not just kind, graceful. Soft-spoken. The kind of woman who never raised her voice, who brought lasagna to funerals and mailed birthday cards on time. She had the sort of smile that could make you feel like you mattered. But to me, that smile always stopped just short of her eyes. It was performance. Polished. Practiced. She was the kind of woman who knew exactly how to look like a good mother, and exactly how to hide that she never really tried to be one. My name is Clara, and I was the daughter people assumed was lucky. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't locked in closets. I wasn't starved or bruised. But I was invisible in the ways that mattered. My mother didn't love me, not really. She loved the idea of a daughter. A little girl she could dress in pastels. And introduce to neighbors. A young woman she could correct at dinner parties so she'd look smart in comparison. A child who could exist as a mirror to her illusion of perfection. Growing up, I tried hard to earn love. I got good grades. I spoke softly. I never challenged her. I became obsessed with trying to read her moods like weather patterns, adjusting myself constantly to avoid the emotional chill that settled in whenever I disappointed her, which was often. Even if I never understood how or why, she had a way of withholding affection so gently that no one else noticed. If I said something she didn't like, her smile would fade a little. Her voice would turn sweet but sharp. "Is that really how you want people to see you, Clara?" she'd say. Or, "You were doing so well, and then you went and said that." Small things. Not enough to call abuse, but enough to make me feel like I was always failing at something I could never name. My father was there, physically. But emotionally, he orbiting around my mother like a satellite. He'd nod along to whatever she said, always careful not to upset her balance. He didn't protect me. He didn't see the subtle digs, the quiet dismissals, the way she weaponized disappointment. Or maybe he did see and decided it was easier not to. By the time I was a teenager, I'd learned how to disappear. I kept to myself. I stopped asking for things. I stopped confiding in her. I knew she'd use it later, twist it into a lecture or a story to embarrass me in front of others. She always framed it like care. "I just want you to do better. You know I only say this because I love you." But it never felt like love. It felt like control wearing a mask. College was my first real breath of air. I left for a university out of state, far enough that weekend visits weren't possible. And for a while, I believed I could leave it behind. That maybe what I'd gone through wasn't so bad. That maybe I was just sensitive. She was always careful to call me that, too sensitive. But healing doesn't happen when you pretend nothing happened. The weight of years started to surface in ways I didn't expect. I had trouble trusting people. I froze in conflict. I apologized constantly, even when I wasn't wrong. And the worst part? A voice in my head that still sounded like hers. Doubting me, second-guessing me, cutting me down when I was proud of myself. I tried therapy. It helped. It gave me words like emotional neglect and narcissistic dynamics. I read books. I joined online groups. I started to realize I wasn't alone, that this kind of mothering, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but leaves you doubting your worth, was more common than I ever knew. That's when the idea of revenge started. Not out of hate. Not even out of anger, really. But out of exhaustion. Out of the deep, aching desire to be seen. To stop playing the role she wrote for me. To finally tell the truth, even if she called it betrayal. She had built a reputation in our town, the loving mother, the charitable neighbor, the perfect woman. And I had let her. I had played along. Smiled in family photos. Visited on holidays. Let her post about how proud she was of me, even as she never once asked how I really was. But that was going to change. I didn't know exactly how, not yet. But something inside me had cracked, and there was no going back. I started small. I went back through every journal entry I had written since I was 11. It was strange, even in the quiet pages of a notebook meant only for me, I had censored myself. I wrote around the pain. I used euphemisms. Mom seemed disappointed in me today, I'd scribbled once, after she called me ungrateful for not wearing the Easter dress she chose. Another entry read, "I think maybe something's wrong with me. I don't feel like I matter here." Reading those pages as an adult was like watching a little girl trying to earn the right to breathe. I cried more than once. But I didn't stop. I typed everything up. I started organizing it by theme, things she said to belittle me. Moments I felt invisible. Gaslighting. Weaponized guilt. It wasn't that I wanted to publish it, not yet. But I needed to see the pattern. I needed to believe myself. At the same time, I began to record our phone calls. Not because I wanted to catch her doing something bad, but because I knew how easily she twisted things. I'd confront her about something small, and by the end of the conversation, I'd somehow be apologizing. These recordings were for me. Proof that I wasn't imagining it. Once, she asked about my job and I told her I had a presentation I was nervous about. She said, "That's surprising. You never struck me as the confident type." I responded, "I've grown a lot since college." Her tone turned syrupy. "That's sweet, Clara. Don't get ahead of yourself, though. Confidence isn't the same as being good at something." I listened back to the call later. Heard how calm she sounded. How kind. If I'd told someone about that conversation, they might say, "She's just giving advice." But I knew better. That was how she worked. Gentle erosion. A constant trickle of doubt until you were hollow inside. I never imagined revenge as fireworks or confrontation. I knew she'd never admit anything. She wasn't built that way. She would cry. Say I was cruel. Say I misunderstood. Play the victim like she always did. So I stopped fantasizing about forcing her to confess and started planning how to speak without needing her permission. I created a blog. Anonymous. No names. No locations. Just a space called The House That Love Forgot. I wrote in the second person at first. You grew up in a home where silence was louder than screams. You learned how to shrink to survive. It wasn't about her. It was about me, and people like me. To my surprise, people found it. Other daughters. Sons. People in their 30s, 50s, 70s. They left comments like, "I thought I was the only one," and "I never knew how to explain this kind of pain." It gave me courage. I began writing more directly. My mother's abuse didn't have fists. It had smiles. It had questions with knives tucked inside. It had praise that always came with conditions. I wasn't beaten, but I was broken, carefully, beautifully, and quietly. It was never a gotcha blog. I wasn't naming her. But I was no longer hiding the shape of what happened. And the more I wrote, the more the weight lifted. Then something unexpected happened. A woman from our town, someone who had known my mother for years, messaged the blog. I almost didn't open it, afraid it would be someone recognizing my story and calling me a liar. But she wrote, "I knew something wasn't right." She always made me feel small, too. More messages followed. From former neighbors. Women who had worked with my mother in charity events. Even a childhood friend who remembered coming over and feeling on edge in our house. That's when I realized, it wasn't just me. She hadn't just been cruel in private. She'd been controlling in other people's lives, too. Only no one had ever said anything, because she was so polished. So admired. So skilled at making people feel like maybe the problem was them. I started interviewing people. Privately. Carefully. I asked them if I could write their experiences, too, anonymously. They all said yes. I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was building a chorus of quiet truths that had never been allowed to speak. And for the first time, I could see the full shape of her shadow, and how many lives it had quietly touched. That's when I knew this wouldn't just be a blog anymore, this was going to be the beginning of something bigger. It took me weeks to admit what I was about to do, even though I wasn't naming her outright, and even though I had every right to tell my truth, part of me still felt disloyal. That voice in my head, hers, really, kept whispering, "What if you're blowing this out of proportion? What if you're just being dramatic? What if you're the problem?" But every email I received from strangers who had lived through similar things helped quiet that voice a little more. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. The shift came slowly. I started drafting a longer piece, not just a blog post, but a story. One that moved from my childhood through my adulthood, weaving together journal entries, recorded phone calls, and others' anonymous testimonies. I didn't dramatize. I didn't exaggerate. I let the facts stand on their own. Her words, repeated back exactly as she said them, were more damning than anything I could invent. I titled the piece, "The Smile She Wore When She Broke Us." It started like this: my mother never raised a hand against me. She raised doubts. She raised expectations. She raised silence like a sword and wielded it with the grace of a woman who had been praised her whole life for her poise. You never had to scream when you could control the air in the room. She taught me that. It was brutal in its honesty, but also deeply personal. It wasn't about vengeance anymore, it was about reclaiming my narrative. I sent it to 3 online publications that focus on mental health, family trauma, and emotional abuse. One of them, based out of California, emailed me back within 3 days. We think this is one of the most powerful submissions we've ever received. If you're comfortable, we'd like to publish it as a feature piece. I sat there reading the email, hands trembling. They were going to publish my truth. My real story. All of it. I took a deep breath. Then I replied, yes. The article went live a week later. They asked if I wanted to use a pseudonym or go by my real first name. I chose a middle ground. My real first name, but not my last. Enough to claim my words. Not enough to invite chaos. I thought maybe a few people would read it. Maybe some would share it. I had no idea how fast it would spread. Within a day, the article had over 30,000 views. Within a week, over 250,000. People weren't just reading it, they were feeling it. I received messages from therapists who said they were sharing it with clients. From survivors who finally had the words they had spent years searching for. From daughters estranged from mothers who told me, I thought I was broken. You made me feel whole. And then, as I knew would happen eventually, it reached my hometown. The text started rolling in. Clara, is this about your mom? Did you really write that article? I had no idea. I always felt something was off about her, but she was just so respected. I stayed calm. I didn't delete anything. I didn't apologize. I didn't run. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of her anymore. And then came the email. From her. It was short, cold, predictable. I don't know what fantasy you're trying to sell to strangers, but you've humiliated yourself. If you think airing made-up grievances makes you look brave, it doesn't. You've destroyed this family's name. Hope it was worth it. I stared at the words on the screen, half expecting to crumble. To question myself. To feel shame, but I didn't. I felt nothing but clarity. She had never once asked if what I wrote was true. She didn't deny the specifics. She didn't ask how I was. She was only angry that her mask had slipped, that the perfect mother, the darling of her community, had been shown for who she really was. It was worth it. Every word, and I wasn't done yet. Word traveled fast. My mother's community, her charity board, her Sunday brunch circle, even the women at her hair salon, all saw the article. Some pretended they hadn't. Others pretended it wasn't about her. But people knew, because the details were undeniable. The stories I shared, the language I used, they came from real moments only someone close to her could have known. The fake birthday parties she threw for photos, but forgot to invite me to. The fundraisers she held in my name for teen mental health, while she refused to let me see a therapist. The way she'd say, we raised Clara with love and values. While dragging me into her room to scream into my face if I didn't get an A. People stopped calling her inspirational. They started calling her intimidating, controlling, cold, and she hated that more than anything. She tried to spin it. Told the story at church like I had a mental breakdown and was lashing out in confusion. Claimed I was struggling since college and this was just a cry for help. It almost worked. For a while, the silence returned. But this time it wasn't protecting her, this time it was suspicion. Then someone anonymously forwarded me an audio recording, a voicemail. My mother had left one of her board members after a tense meeting. She was raging. Calling them ungrateful, swearing they were buying into some hysterical drama, and threatening to pull every penny of fundraising she'd brought in unless they started treating her like the queen she believed. She forgot the golden rule of reputation. It's easier to keep it than to recover it. I didn't release the voicemail. I didn't need to. The damage was already done. What really pushed things over the edge was what came next. One of the therapists who had read my story contacted me. A woman named Dr. Hannah Rhodes. She ran a podcast on emotional abuse within families and wanted to know if I'd come on, anonymously or not, to share my experience. At first, I said no. I was tired. Exposed. I had told my truth and that felt like enough, but a week later, I found myself lying awake at 3 a.m. thinking about all the girls. Like me. The ones still stuck in houses like mine. Still convinced that love means walking on eggshells. Still unsure if the pain they feel is real or just ungratefulness in disguise. So I emailed back, I'm in. We recorded the episode 2 weeks Later. I didn't hold back. I spoke slowly, carefully, not out of fear, but because I wanted to get every word right. I described the ways emotional abuse hides itself in praise, perfection, politeness. How the cruelty wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was invisible, and that's what made it so hard to survive. The episode aired. It hit 1 million listens in under a month. Something shifted after that. I started getting invited to panels, podcasts, survivor groups. Not as a victim, but as someone who had found a way to name the abuse. Not just for myself, but for others. And then came the part 1. Hadn't expected. A girl, maybe 16, messaged me. Said she was scared of her mother. Said everything I described in the podcast felt like her own life. She didn't want to run away. She just wanted to know she wasn't crazy. That someone believed her. I did more than believe her. I talked to her every week. Got her connected with support groups in her city. Helped her find a therapist willing to work pro bono. Eventually, she wrote me back, "You saved my life. You really did." And suddenly I realized something. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was redemption. Not for her, for me. For everyone like me. For every scar that wasn't visible. For every compliment that was actually a cage. I wasn't tearing her down. I was building myself up. Months passed. Then a year. My mother faded from the spotlight. She didn't vanish, narcissists rarely do. But she retreated. Quietly pulled out of the charity board. Stopped giving speeches. Her Instagram went silent. No more inspirational captions. No more perfect family brunch photos. Just stillness. People forgot about her, and for someone like my mother, that was the worst punishment imaginable. She couldn't scream her way out of silence. Couldn't lie her way into admiration anymore. Her power was image, and now the mirror was shattered. And she had no idea how to pick up the pieces without cutting herself on the truth. As for me, something inside had changed. I wasn't trying to run anymore. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I was simply learning how to exist without fear. And that was enough. But healing isn't a perfect straight line. Some days I woke up with her voice in my head, not yelling, just whispering. "You're dramatic. You're weak. You'll regret this." Those old fears don't vanish. They evolve. They wait in quiet corners, but now, I saw them for what they were, echoes. Not prophecy. Not power. Just noise. I started building a small community online. Survivors of family abuse. We met monthly on video calls. Shared stories. Celebrated milestones. One girl finally cut off contact with her abusive father. Another moved out of her toxic home. One guy came out to his family and wasn't punished for it, and cried because he expected to be. We laughed together, cried together, grew together. They started calling me their anchor. It felt strange at first. Me? An anchor? I had spent so many years drifting, scared, unmoored. But maybe that was the point. I had learned to survive in stormy waters. Now I could help others find their footing. One of the women in our group, Elise, said something I'll never forget. "You didn't get revenge, Clara. You reclaimed your story." She was right, because revenge wasn't fire and fury. It wasn't about making her suffer. It was about taking back what she stole: my voice, my agency, my sense of worth. My right to exist outside her control, and I did. I even started writing a book, part memoir, part guide for survivors of emotional abuse. I gave it the title, The Silence Between Screams. Because that's where the real damage happens. In the quiet. In the pretend peace. A publisher picked it up, and in a moment that felt like poetic justice, one of the first bookstores to carry it was the same local shop where my mother used to host book clubs about empowered parenting. Funny how life comes full circle. Eventually, my younger cousin reached out. We hadn't spoken in years. She told me she'd read my article and listened to the podcast. Said she'd always thought something was off about my mom. That she was proud of me. That she finally understood her own mother better too, and had begun asking harder questions about their family dynamic. One story ripples into others. That's the thing no abuser can anticipate. That once someone tells the truth, even if it's quietly, even if it's messy, it gives others permission to do the same, and truth multiplies. So here I am, years later, still living in the same city. No longer hiding. No longer pretending. I drink coffee slowly now. I sit in silence without panic. I let myself laugh without looking over my shoulder. I know what peace feels like. It's not perfection. It's not applause. It's freedom. I don't know if my mother ever read the book. She probably did. Maybe she burned it. Maybe she underlined it and tried to find loopholes. Maybe she screamed into her pillow the way I used to. I'll never know, and honestly, I don't need to, because I'm not her prisoner anymore. Not her secret. Not her scapegoat. I'm me, whole, loud, real, and finally, free.